if you were heterosexual and your kid asked how our baby's born, you don't often say, well, darling, daddy takes his penis and puts it in my vagina. And we usually do it in the bedroom, but sometimes we do it on the living room if we get, no, we edit for kids.
Hello, everyone. I am the most excited for today's chat. I was joking that this is my very own therapy session that we're just going to share with everyone. So, today we're going to talk about donor stuff and how we talk to our children about it. So, Dr. Braverman is here and agreed to kind of share her wisdom and how she talks to her patients and clients and all of that. So, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Andrea Braverman. I'm a clinical health psychologist here at Thomas Jefferson University and Hospital, and been working in this field for many decades.
It's important work. And, when we talked the last time, and, I was saying that when I first heard that my wife and I were going to have to go talk to a counselor prior to starting the fertility process, it really sounded offensive. We were like, why? Like, you think that you need to be like kind of psychologically evaluated, but that's not at all what it's about. It's like, hey, you are going to be using donor material. Let's open the conversation about it and just, see how you feel. So, let's say that my wife and I, so lesbian couple comes into you and we're going to use donor sperm. How does that combo kind of go?
Well, usually starting with the you're not here to be evaluated. This is a psychoeducational session because I think it is offensive to say, what is it about us that we need to be, see a shrink kind of thing. But usually, and what I always do is start what are the goals of our getting together? What is a psychoeducational session? And that's exactly what you introduced, which is talking about, hey, what do we know about families that are created with the assistance of donor insemination or with donor sperm, and what are resources out there, things to be thinking about right now that might even influence what donor you select. And then going forward, I always kid everybody. I say we're going to start with you having a baby, but actually by the end of it, we'll have you giving birth to a fully formed adult. So, because some of these issues are spanning that can span a lifetime.
Right. Right. And there's, now with like that new documentary that's out, and there's just been a lot, I think it's a lot more in the spotlight of, but I think like more negative stuff is kind of out in the spotlight of, you know, donor conceived people who were lied to
Yeah.
their whole life,
And
and
yeah, and sorry to interrupt, but no, you're absolutely right. And it depends when we talk about donor, we talk about it as one big, the same quilt, but it's actually a patchwork quilt because depending on when you were conceived or as parents, when you chose to conceive, you would have a very different experience. When I got into the field in the mid 80s, the only donor insemination that was being done for same-sex couples was on outside the doctor's office. Inside the doctor's office, it was all for heterosexual couples based on protecting the male partner and sorry, no, husband, because it was for married couples only, of course. And we had to protect dad at all costs. So let's try to erase that the donor ever existed. So information on the donor was minimal. The whole approach was just, the psych was completely out of it because you were just fixing a problem, right?
right,
And then as couples started coming along who were going to be clear that they were going to disclose, and that was mainly same-sex couples, and it was obviously lesbian couples because we really weren't doing donor egg with gestational carrier back then. It was the lesbian couples who led the way, saying, "No, duh, we're going to tell our kid. Here's the information I want on my donor. Like, call me crazy, but I want an extended medical history. I want an identity for my child. I don't want to make this donor some weird, creepy, shadowy figure that's lurking out there. And then that dovetailed also with the fact that the internet then grew, and now way too much of our information is out there. Okay, personal aside, but also, and then that followed on the heels of that followed direct to consumer DNA testing like 23andMe, Ancestry,
Yeah.
Genealogy, all these websites where all of a sudden people like, oh, to heck with the website, and the sperm banks or the egg banks for that matter, we can find each other. So
Yeah.
everything blew up. But if you're a 6-year-old person, guess what? The only way there was no option. So 60-year-olds, quite frankly, would if you are 60 years old, and donor conceived, you're usually finding out under adverse circumstances. There's no information on the donor, and the only way to do is go on a DNA hunt to try to find people. And those feelings are very different than I always grew up. My two moms were open with me from the get-go. I always knew I was
Yeah.
donor conceived. In fact, maybe they gave me more information than I even wanted, and so you go from one extreme almost to the other extreme.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like the loudest of voices right now are the older, the kind of the adults at this stage where they did not know, and suddenly I know somebody who found out because of 23andMe. And it's kind of, like, wait, what?
Yeah,
What happened here? And, I want to always learn from donor conceived people and individuals because it's important for us to know, kind of their experience, what they wish was done differently. I think what's really hard for especially same-sex couples is is hearing so much of the negative and kind of people not wishing they weren't born, but saying along those lines. And for like same-sex couples, like we have no choice. Like lesbian couples, we don't have a choice.
yeah,
We need donor material, and so it's very hurtful and harmful, to hear from us, like for to tell us like you should be careful before you create your family. And I think that yes, being careful of being open, but I think there's like a lot of hate thrown thrown
yeah.
our way, and so it is very hard. And so as a therapist, what do you suggest to your patients, or kind of mention like, hey, here's how we explain it from the very beginning so that we do have very open conversations with our children?
Absolutely. No, I will be happy to talk about how we explain it to our children. I just want to take a step back and just add to what you were saying, which is, I think, remember again, some of the loudest voices are coming from people that were lied to, and we have very little. We have fewer, not very little, but we have fewer studies looking at kids that were raised sort of openly and honestly. And in the model from before, the parents were put first. They were in the center of every decision being made.
Yeah.
Kids now, where the kids, shockingly, are put in the center of all the decisions being made.
Right.
So I think that is a fundamental shift. So when hate is being thrown, I always say, remember, the experience of the person throwing the hate and where they're coming from, so that you're not, that it's not to say you're wrong, but just because they're from their experience, that is very real.
It's coming from
But
pain for
it's
sure.
coming from
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
And that is not necessarily what this generation of kids growing up in growing up in a world where they may not be the only one in the room, and that has a different family story than the traditional heteronormative family story. And so kids, I think kids these days, my grandkids generation are kind of going like, yeah, so like, yeah, I go to
Right.
school and so and so has two mommies and so has two daddies. And yeah, most of the class has a mommy and a daddy, although half of those people are divorced and remarried, and they're
Right.
blended,
They've got four, right. They've got two moms and two dads now.
right. It's like, I feel like it's go fish. Do you have any moms? Sure, I've got a few extra, but I got two dads. So like, let's do, yeah. And what a wonderful, healthy world to not define, what is the normal family. I mean, as a psychologist, we hate words like what's normal. It's like,
Right.
ah.
Right.
But when we talk to our kids, honestly, that's the framework that we're coming from, which is shifting that narrative. Before it was let's disclose to our children about their donor conception, to much more of a let's tell our child their their story. Everybody's got a story. What's in your story? And I might come from my generation, almost all of them were very much mom, dad, married, white picket fence, whether that worked out or not, that was usually it. And and this is more your parents, or I hate to say grandparents, no, parents generation. I'm not that old. Is, that began to change because in my lifetime, then all the, I can remember where divorce was like, yeah, big deal. But when I was a kid, it was a big deal. For your generation, divorce was zero ever a big deal,
Right.
but you probably didn't grow up with a lot of families where stories had two moms or two dads in it,
No.
or even a single mom by choice. Now, by your child's generation, yes, that's becoming, that's when they go to preschool or school, that's not going to be that striking, except depending on where you live.
Right.
Now, we're in Philadelphia, we're a large metropolitan region, but you go 2 hours west of here, and that's a very different story.
Right. Well, I don't live there.
Yes, nor do I. But, I think that storytelling is starting with either, you start at the beginning, which is for you, it would be your moms loved each other very, very much. And they wanted to have a baby, and they knew that you needed a seed or an egg from a woman, a seed or a sperm from a man, and a warm place in the tummy called a uterus for the baby to grow. And so, being two moms, we knew we had the egg and we had the uterus, but we needed a seed from a man. And so we went to the doctor for some help. And, for kids, this resonates because what do we say to the kids from the time they can remember? Be a good helper. Helper language is, I think very useful. Now, within my field, people debate because people like to make careers of debating about each other. Is helper language the right language? Is that, but the bottom line is everybody develops their own language around their story. And if you're a single mom by choice, it's like mommy wanted a baby very, very much before you were born. And she knew to make a baby, you needed blah, blah, blah. And I had the egg and I had the uterus. Or if you're a single dad by choice, I had the sperm, but I didn't have the egg or the uterus. It becomes part of this. Everybody starts the same way, same ingredients. In fact, that is the tagline for the conference I run every year through Jefferson on infertility counseling. It's called All Natural Ingredients, and as a picture of an egg and a sperm. And it's to remind everybody with a smile on our face is we're not changing anything around. This is not gene editing. This is not, I mean, so, what is the story we're telling? It's sort of the same way if you are a two-parent family, kids want to hear how their parents met, how they fell in love. That has nothing to do with genetics, hopefully. Hopefully you did not grill your wife on the first or second date about her medical history. Sorry, can't go out on the third. Didn't like the medical history.
I say it's always lovely when you need, like when we had donor sperm, we were like, we can look at the entire medical history and be like, nope. But you don't do that when you meet someone and fall in love. You're not like, tell me about the psychological background of your great grandfather.
Really didn't like that tweak of your aunt over there. So the storytelling is that it starts with simple. And for the little kids, what are young kids hearing? I'm loved, I'm wanted. What a fabulous way to start your story. Do kids really care about the details? No, but as they get older and they absorb more and they grow into their understanding, then they more gets added. And then they will ask more sophisticated questions. Your 4-year-old will say, was he nice? Did he like to do the activities I like to do? If even that. Your 14-year-old might say, huh, why would somebody want to donate sperm, mom?
Mm,
They will ask as their interests compel them. And we know, look, there's a normal distribution for all things. The majority of the kids will be curious and ask questions. You'll have some kids on one end that want to have nothing to do with it and leave me alone. And have some kids, even from a young age, it's just this sort of, why? And, what it translates to in terms of trajectory for their lifetime, I don't think we've got a lot of research. I think it's more, if you go back to basic psychological research about what makes kids grow and into having a healthy foundation, it's that information, it's the trust in their parents, it's the support around things, and not the parental. I don't want you to ask about the donor because it really stinks that we had to use a donor. It should be all the same. Just because we had to use a donor, it doesn't matter. So
right,
don't ask questions.
right,
That doesn't work so well.
right.
Putting that puts the parents' needs in front, and instead of
Yeah,
saying, you know, is it the surprise that most kids are curious that they'll ask questions?
they're always curious. So
Yeah.
for my son, for example, so he's very much into wanting to meet people and wanting to know people, but he's not. So we started the conversation with him, and we read some books, and we showed him pictures of the donor. He did not ask many questions. I think whatever the day it was, he was just like, okay, cool, like whatever. But what would one say if he was like, oh well, I think he asked where he lived, and we were like, oh, we don't know. Like, but if he was like, I want to meet him, I want to talk to him, what would you say to when you're 18? Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's reassuring to him that saying, oh, sure, no, I understand that. He was a helper to us. And, right now he's open to, if you picked an open donor, and we'll talk about that, I would say that's something that we can do in the future. But right now, he's not a part of our lives. And so, we've got this information, we can talk about that, but he's not going to be a part of our lives right now.
Okay.
And that reassurance of saying, not like, no, you cannot meet him, or 18, like you might as well say,
He doesn't know time. He'll be
yeah,
like, later
yeah,
today. He'll be
exactly.
like, later, yeah, totally.
It's always like when you ask little kids, how old do you think I am? 120? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Well, for Mother's Day at school, they did a little questionnaire, and he said that I was 14 and my wife was 40, and she was horrified.
No, no, you're
Just random
yeah,
numbers. It's
ouch.
like, she's like, really?
Uh, yeah, no, kids, again, you have to think like a kid. The same way, my late mother famously told this story that when I was, probably about your son's age, for some reason, I must have heard the word gonorrhea somewhere. And in the middle of the supermarket, I said, Mommy, what's gonorrhea? Like, my poor mother, I was little enough to still be like riding in the basket, I guess. And she said, she did the right thing. She said, that's a very good question, but we're not going to talk about it right here. And evidently I forgot all about it because, kids are sponges and they pick up everything. And that was it. And I think the next time I was explaining to her what gonorrhea was, but, as an adult, but it's kids. We don't always say yes to everything our kids want to know at times.
Yeah.
If you were heterosexual and your kid asked how our baby's born, you don't often say, well, darling, daddy takes his penis and puts it in my vagina. And we usually do it in the bedroom, but sometimes we do it on the living room if we get, no, we edit for kids. So we make our best parental judgment about what information they're going to learn and how and when, without trying to put any negativity on it, that it's shrouded in secrecy. But kids aren't ready for everything. I mean, I would not share my financial dealings with a kid in grade school. They don't have the sophistication to understand it. To them, $100 is like you're rich. It's like I wish. So, so we make our best guesses. Doesn't mean we're always right, and that's what I also try to tell parents, which is it's okay. We do our best. We try to recalculate and reconfigure, and based on our kids, and if you have more than one kid, then there's different birth orders, and the oldest one is going to find out before the youngest one. So the youngest one, is going to learn way before the older one did. And, we do our best.
Right. Right. Okay.
And if you have parents that are doing their best, you're way ahead of the curve.
We're working on it. It's not, I feel like it was something that I knew that we'd have to talk about, but I kind of just brushed it under the rug. And now kind of being more in the work that I'm doing, I was like, okay, guess we got to talk about this. So then moving along to the next piece of it is when you have a donor, especially donor sperm, oftentimes there are a lot of other genetic half siblings out there. And, I knew that was something, but I, as the non-biological mother, for me, it was something that I wasn't ready to explore until recently. Um, I guess I just felt like I didn't want to know other beings out there that were actually biologically connected to my children, even though they're my children. But we did go down that path and found that there are several others, and we have not broached that subject yet with Parker. But how does one talk about that? Because it's he knows he has a sister, he knows he's a brother, but to be like, oh hey, you've got other brothers and sisters out there, but they don't live with us and we don't know them. How does
Yeah.
one even talk about that?
Yeah, I think that I would go back, and you see this in some of the kids' books, which I'll borrow from liberally. I mean, they talk about just saying, and the donor was this nice man, the kind man who helped what's more, there are more families like us out there. He helped other mommies to have, or other parents, because we don't know that they're just mommies,
Ours are
other
all
parents.
mommies.
They're all mommies? Okay.
Yeah.
So he helped other mommies to have children too. And we talk about seed planting. You've planted the seed.
Mm.
For him at 4, he's concrete. I understand what a sister is. A sister is somebody who lives in my house.
Right.
To say, well, you have a genetic half sibling out there. It's like, what? So just knowing that this donor helped other families, and when you feel he is ready and has that concept, you can introduce, more of the concrete details. Well, what does that mean? He helped other families. Well, that means that there are people that share the same genetics. And it's interesting, even terminology. You refer to yourself as the non-biological mom. You are actually the biological mom, not the genetic mom.
Oh, okay. I don't know that.
I know.
Like, I'm like, I don't. So yeah. So for people who are listening, it's my wife's eggs, and I carried them. So I know there's like epigenetics and all that stuff out there, and mitochondrial DNA, and fancy words that I don't know what they mean. But I get, yeah. I don't, whatever it is.
But the point is, it's like, do you have to have a label? I mean, look, if you were 2 dads, then it's all or nothing. You're the genetic and the biological or nothing. But with women, right, we have dual roles. And so does it really matter? I think what you're getting at is more, we live in a world where what does genetics mean? And when you have to go the donor route, whether it's because of a medical reason or a absence of a partner with that seed reason, it then there's still those same feelings of what does it mean to me as the non-genetic parent. And one of the things when I meet with a couple is I really encourage them to be able to talk about that, because people, we do have, you can't tell anymore. It's only at the very end, thank you, COVID. But before COVID, I leaned into my being a redhead. I've been a redhead all my life. I was that redheaded child.
Well,
So prime me for this work from birth, because my entire childhood I heard, where did that red hair come from?
yeah.
Who do you look like? Tell me, it was that loop back to genetics. And I was truly the redheaded child where recessive gene popped up. If you had looked at me, if you looked at my parents as a written donor profile, there still wouldn't have been red hair. It evidently must have come from the generation before. And that's what, recessive genes are so much fun with all of this. So, being acutely aware that we live in a world of resemblance talk, even when you're a same-sex couple, it's with a different meaning. Like for my parents, I don't think anybody was truly accusing my mother of infidelity. Where did
Right.
that red hair come from? But it's that same, like, where did it come from pressure, and you know what does it mean to have different genetics from your parents? If you're a same-sex couple, it's leaning into the one of the more offensive questions out there of, but who's the real mother? As
Hmm.
if genetics determines it. You're going to
Right.
confuse the heck out of them. Well, I delivered, but it's my wife's egg. What do I do with that? But I think for most people, that is, it is still, for a lot of reasons, not the way it happens. So the genetic and the bio and the delivering mom are one and the same, and so somehow there's this, legitimacy given to genetics that isn't when you're not, and hence why I think a lot of people do try to pick a donor that looks like the non-genetic parent.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that, because we live in a world that will do that to you.
Yeah. Yeah, we get it a
But
lot. My kids are tall. So my son
yeah.
is very tall. I am very short. And he's also the spitting image of my wife. But if I'm out somewhere with just him and he's got bleach blonde hair, people are like, "Oh my gosh, he's so tall. Like, does he get it from his dad?" And I'm like, "Actually, I have a wife, and it's her biological child that I carried." Like, I literally will
Yeah.
explain the whole thing.
And
It's
people are like,
right.
yeah,
I mean, people are pretty cool. Usually, then they'll be like, "Oh, well, I know someone who's gay." I'm like, "We probably know each
yeah,
other."
exactly.
Just kidding. No, it's yeah, yeah. Sometimes I just try to. I'm like, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I don't feel like outing myself in that moment. Um,
Except that as your son grows, part of it is role modeling too. So you don't want to blow somebody off with information that then doesn't serve your son's best interests.
right.
So that's part of what we talk about, at even from the very beginning, is saying it's a challenge, right? So part of what, if you picked a donor that was completely different from you, or some couples, if you're both white and you pick a black donor, I'm like, your child is going to always have that question. And the donor is even more present in their lives, because every
Hmm.
time they look in the mirror, there's a, I don't, I look very, I shouldn't say I will, but I am more likely to look very other from my genetic parents. And, then there is that constant questioning, or the assumption, quite frankly, that the child's adopted.
Right.
So for some people, there's been discussion in the field whether that is placing an undue burden on the child with that donor issue than not. But I don't want to get into that.
Right.
That's just such a minefield of issues. And I'm not here to say I know what the answer is. I would just go back to saying to parents, when selecting a donor, again, put your child at the center. What's their experience? And you used your wife's egg. If she's tall and blonde, then okay, that obviously can happen. But picking a donor that would be completely different, like if you were both petite and you picked the Norwegian volleyball player with the blonde hair and the 6'11", that's one thing. But and the idea that we actually can control genetics is really amusing,
Oh yeah.
because
No. It will. My wife is dark hair, and my son is bleach blonde because the donor was very blonde. But like without the hair, they are the exact clone. The donor does look more like me, so people actually think that my daughter looks like me, and I'm like, totally.
Yeah.
totally does. We didn't choose a donor based on that actually, because we were both gonna try to use both of our eggs. It just didn't work out that way. But yeah, no, this is very helpful, and I know that I'll share some of the books, and I actually already did, but I'll share them again. Some of the books that you had mentioned to me, just kind of getting started
Yeah.
with kids. And what age do you suggest people start talking about it?
Oh, very young, but very young just means you start talking about it. If your mom's wanted to have a baby very, very much.
Yeah,
You started the story. When do you start adding in the other? I think, it's more, your kid. Some
yeah,
kids by 4 are ready to, read a book and just have it introduced. Some at 3, we wanted you very much. We needed some help. We went to the doctor for some help, and we're so happy to have you. You start adding it in bits. If you're, when you were pregnant with your daughter, that you start talking a little bit more about, well, some babies, are come in lots of different ways. And that's why I love like the board book Love is a Family, that
hmm,
shows all different kinds of families, has
yeah,
nothing to do with how babies are made.
right,
But it just starts that conversation. See, babies get made in lots of different ways, depending on your family.
yeah,
But some families need more help than others. You can couch it in whatever language is comfortable for you as parents. I mean, my biggest desire is to empower parents. Don't let anybody take your being the number one person on this planet for your child.
yeah,
Get guidance, listen to things, debate. If you're a single parent, debate with get friends and family to debate with you, or talk to yourself as long as nobody's around. If you're two parents, check it out from time to time. Check in. How are we doing? Where's the course going? Do we need to be a little more proactive, or are we just in the reactive stage?
yeah,
Do we pull out the books once in a while and say, let's read this? Or is your kid's best friend's, mom expecting a baby, and you can use that?
mm,
Saying, oh, that reminds me of when we were trying to have you, or using, other times of when you're helping others to say, it's so nice to help others because some others helped us have you. You know, that instead of always this idea of this formal teaching moment, there are opportunities everywhere. And I think the only thing is not in the overzealous, earnest, we will talk about this all the time. We will cover this, of saying, if you're talking about this every day, good grief, then what's the messaging, right?
right.
So, just trying to do the best.
I love it. Yeah, no, that's helpful. And what about like meeting the genetic half siblings? Because I have friends who actually like get together.
Yeah.
Now their kids are really young, so I don't. They even explained like anything, but like, do you think it's like confusing of like they're going back to their house and we're going back to our house, or it's just families
Uh,
are just all made differently, and some families live at different houses? Because I mean, my
yeah,
parents live in their own house, and
right.
you know,
I think let's not pathologize this. I think kids have a much wider view of what this, of just they accept that families all different ways. I mean, look, when I got to know my cousins growing up, it was still a concept. What's a cousin?
right?
That's like, we grew into it. I can't tell you the moment where I went, oh, I can define what a cousin is. It's a genetic relation through a parent, a sibling. And yeah, I think as far as the genetic half siblings, again, it comes back to parents' choice. The same way you can choose to have your kids involved with their cousins, or you can say, my sibling is a wackadoo and I want to have nothing to do with them. And it was a happenstance of birth. Let's not lean into this. So, again, let's let's like renorm all of this, if you will, of saying parents make choices all the time. So there are websites like Donor Sibling Registry, which is great website for meeting other people. Only downside I tell everybody is it's unregulated, so that's great. But the flip side is, just remember, just because you chose the same donor as somebody else does not mean that you will always see eye to eye, or that, I don't think there have been any bad actors on this website yet, but I just always like to be super cautious.
Sure.
I think that I think for each parent or parents, they have to sort of say, what does this mean? What does genetic relatedness mean?
Yeah.
And so for some people, it means family and kinship. For others, it means, and those are the friends that are meeting and having group meetings, and they find incredible, I think, a sense of family, not just and community together. I think for others, it's saying, that's just not, these are other people that I don't want to hold close as kin, if you will, to me. And I want my children to be aware, but I don't want to also overemphasize genetics either. That's not to me what makes for family.
Yeah.
And we know families. I mean, look, our experience with blended families. People grow up with step siblings that have no genetic relationship. They're my sibling. We are tight because we grew up with our wacky parents and, blah, blah, blah. And others who grow up with full genetic siblings and really have no relationship with them at all. So there isn't an all or nothing answer to this. It's a
Yeah.
thoughtful one. It's making a decision as a parent, and it's one of many decisions that we make for our kids as to what we think is in their best interest.
Yeah. Whew, such an added layer again that I just pretended I wasn't going to have to deal with. Um, and
Yeah,
then surprise.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sneaks up
Yeah.
on you, right?
It does. And you don't, life is hard as it is, and you never want to make it any harder for your child. And I think that some people view the fact that they are a two mom or two dad or single parent family as already an extra something that their child has to deal with. Um, that it's like, oh man, I'm going to throw something else at them. But I think that, but what you said was, I think is amazing. It's like, what is a cousin? Like, it's a word. Like, these are just words of, if we play it cool, then they think it's cool and normal. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I look, growing up, I had one set of cousins that lived in California where my father was originally from, and I had a set of cousins from Philly where I grew up. I didn't really know my California cousins. I mean, and even now in my 60s, it's like, okay, it's a curiosity, that
Right.
these people are genetically related to me, but functionally, they're really not family.
Right.
And my cousins here, for better or for worse, no, just sorry if they're listening. No, they're family,
Right.
and our lives have intertwined, but only as adults, and it was a decision I made as an adult to have them in my life, because as kids we really weren't close. We
Yeah.
make choices all the time. I could have easily made a different choice.
Right. And we have people, we have like best friends who are family that
Absolutely.
there's no, it's just, there's family. It's, chosen family is, I think, so important. But I just want to add for people who are listening. So one amazing thing about, so Parker's in preschool, it's a very diverse and open school, and they're very into promoting diversity. We brought books to the school about same-sex families, and we asked, hey, can you read this to his class? And they did, and it sparked an incredible conversation where all the kids were like, oh, like I live with my grandma, and oh, I live with my mom sometimes, and I live with my dad sometimes. And people were like, oh, Parker has two moms. Like, bringing that in, this is an age group of 3 to 6, so just having that and like normalizing it for him in front of his peers like made me feel really good. At least I'm like, okay, I'm trying to proactively do something in that regard. So like, take books in, see if they'll read them to the class, to just again normalize it for your child, and then also to get conversations going with them, because I always say like the children that we're raising, like it's our duty to raise that generation that is open-minded and more accepting, and at this age where they're willing to accept anything as normal, like it's our job to really kind of harvest that now.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom. This was
Oh,
very helpful to me, and I know will be to other people. People have been very excited to listen to this, and I told all of the genetic half siblings of our kids about it, and so they were really excited to kind of hear. And we're all navigating it together. So
yeah,
really,
just we're all human, and just we all start with the same all natural ingredients. And as parents, just give yourself some grace and kindness, and don't do not sacrifice yourself on the altar of perfection. It doesn't exist.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.